All right, we are live. Hey, welcome in, everybody. This is a special Second City Gridiron series that I'm doing with my friend Erik Smith from the QB list. Erik, thanks for doing this, man.
Of course. Really excited to be on. Glad you thought of me first as the resident fantasy football nerd. So I'm very honored. I'm excited to talk about quarterbacks. It's the time of the year when all of us fantasy nerds wake up and we're like, oh, the season is coming very soon. All those off-season projects, we got to get moving on them right now.
Yeah, I think that people probably don't realize that you get a little break after the draft to kind of have some downtime, and then the summer rolls around and the fantasy stuff really starts cranking up. Like you have to really kind of think about, I got to build these boards out. I got to think about sleepers. I got to start following transactions for that kind of stuff. The quarterbacks that we want to start off with tonight, that's a little bit more clear cut because it's not like there's a lot of camp battles going on. I mean, there's maybe one or two out there of like, we're not sure who's going to start in, Washington, Seattle, right? We're not sure exactly who's going to start in Seattle at this point, but for the most part, you know who the starters are. You got a pretty good idea of what kind of offense they're going to run, and you can start doing your projections. So it seemed like quarterback was a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely. And, that's kind of one of those positions. It's a onesie position. You only have to take one of them in most leagues, and it can really set your strategy. If you're taking one in the first 3 rounds, it's going to change a lot compared to if you're taking one at the back half of your draft. So it's a good thing to start with, kind of get that setting out of the way, and you can fill out the rest of your positions after that.
What is your philosophy overall when you're thinking about quarterbacks when you're going into a draft? Now, obviously, when we're going to get into your thoughts on how you stack these into tiers and why tiers are important, but like, how do you enter most of your drafts thinking about quarterback?
Right. So I used to be a diehard late round quarterback drafter. There were years and years and years where you could just grab these high upside guys late. They would pay off for you. Lamar Jackson's the prime example. The year he blew up and won leagues, he was a later draft pick. I used to be completely on board with that. Last year started to sway me a little bit. We have some locked in elite talent players that can run and pass. And the way fantasy scoring is, that's just such a huge advantage for a quarterback to be able to run. So also drafters are getting smarter. Players like Jalen Hurts, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, they're going earlier because they can run. So last year we kind of started to creep towards drafting them a little bit earlier. I still do not draft them, first 4 rounds generally. But this year, I don't know. We'll get through it. You can put a pretty good list together that goes about 14 deep, and I'm still feeling good about the quarterback that I draft. So I think we can kind of get back to the late round quarterback to some extent, but there is a tier that we're going to hit where we want to make sure that we get someone in that group because you're going to get to a point where there's just no rushing upside on these players. Their offense probably isn't going to be high scoring. And it's just, you may get a competent season out of them, but that top 5 quarterback season is just kind of out of grasp for them.
Yeah, and most leagues are going to be 12-team leagues. And so a lot of times you're only thinking about quarterbacks in terms of, maybe 15, 18 deep, right? A lot of guys will take 2 guys. If you take one of the top guys, you might not roster anybody else because when are you ever going to start somebody over Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, right? So if you invest early, you don't need to carry that second quarterback. You'll take that bye week filler when you get to it. The interesting thing that I've noticed since I started playing fantasy, over 20 years ago, is that you start to see a little bit more of these 2 quarterback leagues. Mm-hmm. And we'll get into a little bit of like 2 quarterback strategy and how that opens up the board. But when you're in a 2 quarterback league, a lot of times you're obviously taking 2 quarterbacks, and sometimes you're taking 3 to make sure that you can cover those bye weeks because otherwise you don't have a bye week fill in.
Right. And you may get to somebody like a Davis Mills or even a Mac Jones who maybe doesn't have the highest upside, but we know that they're going to be starting every week unless the Texans really, make a big move here. It sure doesn't look like they are, though. But yeah, just having 16, 17 weeks of a starter is huge then. And I actually do think in 2 QB leagues, you do want to pay up because you'll get into the problem if you don't pay up for quarterbacks in 2 QB leagues. You just have to roster so many to fill those positions. Where if you pay up early, you get Lamar Jackson and Matt Ryan. Like odds are you're going to get 15 plus starts out of them. So it kind of frees up a roster spot. You can kind of focus on everything else. And so yeah, 2 QB leagues pay up, but single QB leagues, I think we can wait and catch the bottom of some of these tiers and let some of the other people overdraft them for the most part.
Well, let's talk about the tiers. So if you're joining us live, or if you're and shoot in your questions if you are joining us after the fact on YouTube, you see that we have this visual board up. If you're listening to us on the podcast, really appreciate that. Maybe check out the visual. We'll tweet it out. We'll put out the final product of what the tiers look like. But we thought it'd be really fun to try to build this visually so that you can see where things go and try to show how these tiers work. So I've been using a tiered system in talking about fantasy sports for longer than I've been writing about football, right? Which is almost a decade at this point. And the idea behind tiers is that you don't want to get locked into one specific player. You want to try to view people on a plane. And so if you have 3 or 4 guys that you project to be about the same, you should be somewhat agnostic as to who you get out of that tier. Let somebody else take those first 2 or 3 guys and be happy that you get the third or fourth, because you do view them about the same. When you start seeing like, I need this guy, that's when you get into reaching. That's when you get into overpaying for positions. And then by the end of the draft, you have big holes on your roster. And so this is a way for you to stay disciplined in your draft. And I'm really excited to build this. And this, I'll go through the board here a little bit. We have 7 tiers that we decided that we would talk about with quarterbacks. The S tier. So we're using like the video game terminology here, with the tier label S being that elite tier. That crazy great weapon that in game bosses will get defeated by. So this is kind of our star tier here. The next tier is A. Which I would consider them locks for QB1, meaning kind of like the top 12 guys. That's kind of the parlance of fantasy speak, is QB1 is usually a top 12 finisher. The B is a boomer bust category. These are guys that, if things break right, they jump into that A tier or better. They have that ability to finish in that top 12, but they also have that ability that there's no real guarantee on the floor. So that bust ability is there. The C is kind of the boring tier. It's kind of the opposite, where you've got a higher floor, but that ceiling's kind of capped. And I'm not gonna. I have no idea what Erik's rankings are, but this feels like a Kirk Cousins tier to me. And so you might be somebody who likes to take a boomer bust guy with a high floor guy and kind of pair those types of players up. That's more than okay. And sometimes you might take a player on the C tier before you take a B tier. If that's your style of drafting, that's okay too. We'll talk about that a little bit. These two kind of go together. It's more of how you approach your draft and what your tolerance for risk is. The D down here, we're considering those quarterbacks that you would think about in 2 quarterback leagues. More than anything. And then the E tier these are future picks. If you're in a dynasty league and you're kind of betting on guys, this is where we're going to talk about Malik Willis, right? Malik Willis probably isn't going to get a lot of snaps this year. This might be somebody, if you're in a dynasty league, you might want to think about taking a Malik Willis because you believe in his potential and where you might think about taking him. And then the final tier is the free tier. This is the stuff that you just want to leave on the free agency pile. You don't want to mess with these guys. Don't let somebody else roster them because they're going to be free agents before long anyway. So that's kind of the bottom tier here. We have pictures of the quarterbacks that we'll pull up when we talk about them and place them into their proper positions. And then we also have some modifiers here, some things that we wanted to consider that we'll put in. So Erik and I are each going to get 1 or 2 of these bears with a heart on it. These are the guys that we love, these guys in this particular tier. Just want to put our kind of stamp of approval on them. We've got some other things. We've got a cheetah for the guy's really fast and, rushing yards are a big part of his game. A bulldozer if he's more of a guy that, is the threat around the goal line. He's kind of a goal line back. There's weapons, fireworks for guys that get into shootouts, injury risk, rocket arm, accuracy type of guy. And then this one here is for a new play caller. So another factor to kind of consider. So we threw some visuals in there and we'll make sure that we explain those when you see it. So Erik, anything else you want to talk about the setup before we get into throwing some guys up on the board?
No, I think you nailed it. Like you said, we'll mention if you're playing in a 2 QB league, some players that maybe rise up the rankings a little bit. Other than that, no, I would just say I tend to lean towards the boom tier as opposed to the C tier. Just because you will see as we get through this, there are a lot of solid quarterbacks. And if your boom player fails, you can always fall back on one of those safer guys that are sitting on waivers. So, no, other than that, I think this looks great. So let's get into it.
Yeah, I just realized that the C tier does just stand for Cousins. This is C for Cousins, so we'll just call it the Cousins tier. All right, let's start off, and I'm going to pick a guy that I think is my number one, and I'm going to see if you agree. So, to me, I think that the guy that has the potential to put up the most volume, and is a threat on the ground, and is a goal line threat, and is on a good football team, is Josh Allen. He's my number one. Where do you have him?
He is number one for me as well. So good call on that one. We're off to a good start here.
Okay. All right. So why did Allen, of all these guys that have that dual threat ability, why is he your number one?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, you looked at some of those little labels we have. You could put just about all of them on Josh Allen. Usually when we get these high upside rushers, that doesn't come along with high passing volume. And Josh Allen is a rare quarterback where you're putting the bulldozer up there. He can score from the goal line. He is a high volume rusher, high volume passer. It's just every stat that you would want from a fantasy perspective. He is putting them up. Elite rushing production, averaged over 7 rushing attempts per game last year. Only Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts were higher than that. 2 consecutive elite years where he scored over 23 fantasy points per game. And that's not easy to repeat. And even like when we look for regression on some of these players, we look for unsustainable touchdown rates. Like sometimes Aaron Rodgers has had some of these years, and he's a bit of an outlier because he can always do them. But Rodgers has had some like QB1 overall years where he just throws an insane amount of touchdowns compared to how many passes he has. You can't really even look for that kind of regression for Josh Allen. They're sustainable touchdown rates. He's running the ball a ton, over 100 rushing attempts over the last 3 years. He had the fourth most passing attempts last year with 38 per game. So, like, I don't know how to pick any holes in Josh Allen. They do have a new play caller. Ken Dorsey replaces Brian Daboll. I suppose, Brian Daboll has received a lot of praise over the years. And I suppose if you're looking for a way that Josh Allen falls back, it may be a new play caller. But with the weapons he has, with just everything, I mean, just everything for Josh Allen is screaming number one pick for a quarterback. So I believe his ADP this time of the year, it's a little sketchy this time of the year with ADP. Not everyone's drafting yet, but his ADP looks like about 24 overall. So you're probably getting him at the start of the 3rd round. That's more the debate on Allen for me than it is being the QB1. So he's locked in for me. It's just a matter of how early do you want to pick him.
I put the headphones on him. I think Perfect. It looks pretty funny. I like it. All right. Good stuff. I'm going to let you tell me who your number 2 is. Who should I pull up next?
Yeah. And so I think these 2 rankings, I almost throw my hands up on who's second and who's third. You can make a case for either one. I think you know which 2 are coming. I am going Patrick Mahomes number 2. Justin Herbert is number 3. I would not fault you for putting Herbert ahead of Mahomes. I'm going to stick with Mahomes. Just a year ago, we were calling him pretty much the Michael Jordan of football. I think sometimes in the offseason, we get too carried away with the weapons the players have. He lost Tyreek Hill. That is going to hurt him theoretically. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the quarterback and how talented they are. And he can make any throw on the field. He's got one of the best offensive play callers in the entire NFL, and Andy Reid. There's just so many just locked in, like, safe aspects to Mahomes' game. I mean, we saw teams, quote unquote, figure him out last year. The Chiefs struggled a little bit offensively. He still put up over 21 fantasy points a game. So, like, if that was him struggling last year, I think Mahomes is going to be just fine. And I think his weapons are a little better than people give him credit for. I know he lost Tyreek, but he still got Travis Kelce. Juju Smith-Schuster has been a quality slot receiver. They drafted Sky Moore. They got Marquez Valdez-Scantling from the Packers for a deep threat. I think a lot of us don't like MVS because we've drafted him late and he's never paid off for us. But as far as a field stretcher, MVS will do the trick for KC. So I just think you could go either way, Mahomes or Justin Herbert. But I'm just going to take Mahomes. I think he's still the best player in the league. You could argue with Allen. Allen's better fantasy-wise, but I just love Mahomes as a player.
Yeah, I think that the Tyreek concern is at least something that's worth noting just because of how much instant offense Tyreek Hill can provide. I think that Travis Kelce getting older, I mean, at some point that he's going to have some fall off in his game. And of course, Travis Kelce isn't someone who has had perfect bill of health. No tight end really does. That's like drafting a catcher sometimes and in fantasy baseball, right? Like you have to worry about that. I do worry a little bit about some coming back down to earth, but this guy he's an alien, right? Like he doesn't really play the game the same way. I think that there's so much interest and hype around the Chargers, which, some people know that's kind of that's my AFC team. It's been that way since they drafted LaDainian Tomlinson. I've really liked the Chargers for a long time, and it's feeling weird. It's feeling weird to hear all this hype everywhere about the Chargers, but you could kind of see why. And Herbert has both of these guys. They've got two of the best arms in the league, right? I mean, if you're going to just list top 5 arms, these guys have to be on the list. Mm-hmm. And obviously Mahomes can create different throwing angles, and he's doing things from we just haven't seen with regularity. But Herbert's got this cannon. Like, I mean, he just has this arm that you just don't we haven't seen that very often, maybe a handful of times throughout the years. And so there is a lot of hype around Justin Herbert, but I think that it's deserved. And so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like from a fantasy perspective and from a real football perspective. I'm not going to argue with you about moving these 2 and 3. I think that this is a pretty locked in top 3 for me, though. I think I'd have a hard time putting anybody above that. And so I know that we probably have more on the S tier, but I think that there's a little mini break on the S tier between the top 3 and your next picks.
Yeah, I totally agree. It would jam in about 10 quarterbacks into the A tier if we did it that way. But even both Mahomes and Herbert, they're not known as the biggest rushers in the world. But I mean, Mahomes topped out in 2020 over 4 rushing attempts per game. Herbert has approached 4 rushing attempts per game. We'll get to some quarterbacks later that are very talented passers, but they have a little bit of extra rushing ability. And one thing I really like about Mahomes is they just throw the ball. And I know they're kind of revamping their offense, but they get into the 5-yard line. They do trick plays. They do shovel passes. Like, he's throwing the touchdowns. So I'm not too worried about a ton of regression there. And yeah, Justin Herbert, if he's the number 1 quarterback next year, I would not be the least bit surprised. I worry a little bit about their depth in the pass catchers. Like, if something happened to Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, there's not a lot there. I mean, of course, Austin Eckler is a good pass catcher, but so yeah, we'll see how these weapons play out for these quarterbacks, but you can't go wrong. Honestly, whichever's your favorite. If you have a favorite team, a favorite player, pick that one between the two, because they're both excellent.
Yeah, and of course, if you're in that position where you feel like, hey, I'm ready to take a quarterback, I'd like to take a quarterback up high because I like this, and I have these 3 guys available, and you believe in Justin Herbert more than you believe, or you like him more then take him, right? Like that's kind of the whole point about the tiers. And like I said, there's just a mini break here. I think you can still consider these next guys S tier, but I would say that there's a partial break here where these 3 I'm taking before I'm taking the next guys. So who you want me to pull up next?
Let's go with Lamar Jackson next. So he had a rough year last year, battled some injuries. Their running backs were decimated. The offensive line was decimated. It was just a nightmare year for the Ravens. But his upside is just unparalleled. And we can really see a lot of positive regression here for Lamar. He scored a rushing touchdown on just 1.5% of his rushes last year. He only had 2 rushing touchdowns. That's not going to keep happening. Like, just the odds, the odds of probability he's going to score more touchdowns than that this year on the ground. Hopefully he's got some more health. But the years before, he was scoring a touchdown on like 4.5% of his rushes. So we're talking about a couple rushing touchdowns already added just out of pure chance. And then I kind of feel like the Ravens are going back to a run-heavy offense. They traded Hollywood Brown. They drafted a bunch of tight ends. And normally that's not great for a quarterback. But when it's Lamar Jackson, that's a good thing that they're going to be running the ball more. The running backs are coming off injuries. I think they're going to need him to run the ball quite a bit. I mean, we're looking at a player here who rushes 10 or more times a game over the last 3 years. So there are no quarterbacks in his tier. Jalen Hurts is close. He had about 9 carries a game last year. So if you want a rushing quarterback, it's Lamar. Here's a situation where if you're getting 6 points per passing touchdown, or if you get some bonuses for completions, he may lower down the tier a little bit. But in your standard 4 point per touchdown league, Lamar is just, he's got huge upside. I mean, his 2019 season was 27 fantasy points a game. Nobody else really sniffs that over the past 3 years, other than Dak Prescott's half a season before his injury. So it's just, there's a lead upside here with Lamar, even though last year everything went poorly.
Yeah, and this is a guy with an elite skill set that trumps everything else. And I think that Lamar's passing is fine, but it's not in this conversation with these other guys. But his skill in running the ball is so much greater than every other quarterback in the game right now. And there's some good running quarterbacks, but he just has that next level that he deserves to be considered in this category, because he can win you a week with his rushing. I mean, most leagues are going to use like 25 yards passing for 1 point or something similar to that, where it's 10 yards of rushing for 1 point. Lamar can take off and he can get you, 50-yard run like that, right? And so he can quickly accumulate a lot of points. So even if his passing totals are somewhat pedestrian a lot of times, that rushing total and his ability to get rushing touchdowns, particularly if you're in that 4-point passing touchdown league, those are huge. Like, hey, he just grabbed a rushing touchdown and 80 yards. That's 14 points right there, plus whatever he gets for passing. So he has this crazy skill set. It's almost like a video game kind of thing, right? Like, it's just like, hey, I'm just gonna drop back and then just take off with this wide receiver that I put at quarterback, right? Like, I mean, he's that fast and skilled to in that part of his game, that it doesn't matter that he's putting up, decent stats from the passing game, because from a fantasy perspective, you just want the numbers.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's round out the S tier. Who else do you have in this top tier?
So the S tier, we're looking for players that could be the QB1 with not a whole lot of luck going their way. You know what I mean? Just a standard year QB1. I think we have to put Kyler Murray into that mix. A lot of it is him staying healthy. Whenever he gets hurt, his rushing falls off a cliff. But he is a pure, he's a dual threat quarterback. He's got a cannon. He can throw the ball deep. I know he looked terrible in that last playoff game, but we saw him over the first half of the year carry fantasy teams. So it's really hard for me to pass up on someone who has top 20 fantasy points per game each of the last 2 seasons. 2020, it was closer to 24, which is an elite number. Just obviously, the DeAndre Hopkins suspension hurts. Obviously, we have questions about his coach, his play calling. There's some questions there, but they get Hollywood Brown. Zach Ertz is competent. They've got some pass catchers. So I am going to tend to look at the good over the bad here with Murray, look at his peaks, and just hope that maybe his 4th year in the league, we can just kind of get a little more even performance that carries us throughout. Because, again, he is rushing. He rushed just a little over 6 times a game last year. That was with an injury down the stretch. 2020, he ran over 8 times a game. So we're going to start running out of these rushing quarterbacks real soon. And Kyler is one of the last that has legitimate, like, MVP level potential.
I mean, I can't really add much about Murray. I don't think he's hurt much by losing Christian Kirk. He is losing a lot with the multi-game suspension from DeAndre Hopkins. So they're going to have to figure that out, because early on, what was working in Arizona was DeAndre line up here, everybody else line up over there, and go do work, D-Hop. And that's going to hurt. He's suspended for, I think, 6 games. Right. For PEDs or whatever that suspension ended up being. That's going to be an issue, right? Like that, when you take away a top 3 wide receiver like that for a guy like Murray, he's going to have to figure that out. And Cliff Kingsbury as a play caller needs to figure some things out too. So this isn't my favorite player to say. I think there's a lot of risk, right, in Murray, and so this would be a guy that if these top 3 guys were gone, I would actually probably wait a little bit more. I'd grab another running back or whatever, and I'd kind of wait further down the list to take a guy that I like down here. So do you have anybody else in the S tier?
Well, real quick on Murray, he is going about 58 overall. So if I can do some quick math, I think that's in the 5th round of drafts. So you get a little discount over those top quarterbacks. I think that would be the argument for him, is while other people spend up, get a 2nd or 3rd round pick quarterback, and the others, hey, you're getting Kyler. Maybe he figures us out. Just the offense gets more complete, and he can kind of take off from there. So if you have some questions about Murray, you may not like my last S-tier quarterback. And this is one that a lot of people are going to debate all offseason, but it is Jalen Hurts. This is fantasy football and not real life football.
Love it. I love it. All right, defend your take.
Yeah. So last year, I mean, he's already done it. Last year, he scored 20 plus fantasy points in his first 7 weeks. That's a crazy number. Like he was on fire. He came down to earth a little bit after that. He suffered an ankle injury and missed week 13. But like 20 plus fantasy points in his first 7 weeks, that's like Lamar Jackson production. And he's just an elite rusher. I mean, he rushed over 9 times a game last year. He's going to he's going to rush for touchdowns as well. And then you add A.J. Brown to his weapons. There you go right there. He's now got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, who really looked good as a rookie, and Dallas Goedert at tight end. They have an elite offensive line. And I just think they're going to be able to move the ball really well, and you're going to get a lot of rushing production from Hurts. So I do understand, like, it feels bad to put a quarterback in this tier when there's a chance their team drafts a rookie quarterback next year. Like, we've all heard the rumors on the Eagles. If doesn't go well this year, they've got the draft capital. Maybe they move up and get a first year or maybe a veteran or something. But I think for this year, they're going to play him. He's going to rush a ton. And outside of that, I'm willing to take the upside here. So again, it gets down to where he's going to go in drafts. And there are actually some players in my tier below he's going after. So maybe you don't draft him in this order, but I do think that this is elite upside here. And if we get a little bit of A.J. Brown touchdown, then a touchdown magic, then all of a sudden we're in a different level for Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I think that this is a take. I love it. I love that this is happening. But you are really talking about the context and the usage from last year carrying over. So you're betting on how he finished the year into this year. There's a little bit of I've got a little bit of like Sean Green going through my head where, like you finish like with a shot out of a cannon. And then the next year he was a total dud. It's a running back. It's not the same thing, but I do think that the weapons are a real thing. Devonta Smith is really good. And I love AJ Brown. So now you've got 2 legitimate guys. You still have Dallas Goedert there, right? Like there's some legitimate weapons for him to distribute the ball to, and he's got upside in running. And I don't think that they're going to be afraid to. They're not going to say, "Hey, stop running." Like this is a guy that they're going to. We're going to try to win games with him. We're going to see what he can do. So it's an interesting place to put him. Yeah. And you're bold if you can do it. But what's his ADP right now? Do you have that handy?
It looks like about 68.
Okay.
So I believe Burrow and Dak are going above him. I think that's it that we haven't already covered. So again, these ADPs are going to change as we get more people drafting. But yeah,
you're in round 5 and 6. The top 5 guys are off the board. Probably Burrow's off the board too at this point. Yeah. But you're talking about a guy that, look, if things do click and they do get into a situation where they're scoring a lot of points and he's distributing the ball, this could be a guy that challenges from that number 1 spot. I see how you get there and how you put him at the end of this tier. Let's move on to the next tier and let's talk about let's kind of round out that QB1. So okay. Who would be the top of your A tier?
All right. And the resident Bengals fan here, it pains me to not have Joe Burrow in the S tier, but he is at least first in the A tier. So it's really nitpicking here. It's just the rushing ability that separates him a bit. And really, there are multiple guys in this tier that could be the QB1. Like I said before with Aaron Rodgers, we've seen strictly pocket passers have crazy touchdown totals and be the QB1. So it could be Burrow. It could totally happen. He just does not have that rushing ability. And I just think it puts him in a different category. We also, last year's a complicated season because he was coming off the major ACL injuries. So they took it easy on him early on last year. But he did only put up 5 20-point fantasy games in the first 14 games of last year, and his high was 27 points. Like after that, it was 23. Like it wasn't really that great from a fantasy perspective for most of the year. And then he puts up 38 points and 35 points against Baltimore and KC down the stretch. And then obviously they go to the Super Bowl, and the rest is history. But most of the year, he was not an elite fantasy quarterback. So I do think it's worth remembering. Now, better offensive line is huge. Obviously, that's going to be a big difference. We'll see year 2 of Jamar Chase. There's a ton of reasons for optimism here, and he could easily finish as the QB 2, 3, 4. But just as far as the profile, I have him at number 7 overall, I believe that is. And yep. I would be happy to draft him. He's going to be great. It's just the rushing ability is not quite there. Let me see. He averaged about 2.5 rushing attempts a game last year. even though he's a year removed off the ACL, I still, they need to protect him better. So I would hope he's not running around for his life like some of these other quarterbacks are.
Yeah, you don't really want him running too much. I think that I'm good with that. I've got a couple more guys down here that I think is round out my top 12.
Mhm.
Not a lot of running at this point with any of these guys, really. I mean, Dak coming off that injury, I don't see him running too much. Wilson is getting older, so I do think we're in that tier of like high volume passers, but not quite in terms of the rushing totals. But who are the next couple guys? Let's talk about them.
Yeah, so this is where it gets really close here. And so I went with Dak Prescott here. And I think that's a couple spots. Although now that I'm looking at ADP, maybe that's where everyone has him. But I feel like a lot of people are kind of sleeping on Dak, other than all the Cowboys fans out there.
Sure, there are a lot.
Yeah, there are a lot. But his first year back from that serious injury last year, and he was really good. I mean, he's 20 fantasy points a game. He went crazy the year before he got hurt and was averaging 27 fantasy points a game. He'll rush a little bit, 3 or more carries per game on the ground. And I know he's lost some weapons. Amari Cooper's gone. Michael Gallup's coming back from injury, but I just think he's a really talented quarterback. I think the defense can't repeat what they did last year. The way defense goes, they tend to regress from year to year. Usually, if you have an elite defensive season, it doesn't quite carry over to the next year. So I think maybe a little more shootouts here for Dak than maybe we had to see last year. So
okay.
I think he's been 20 or more fantasy points over the last 3 years. He's just been rock steady. There are some quarterbacks. The next one we're going to talk about is right there with him. And it's kind of like the Mahomes and Herbert situation where you can flip-flop them, and I'm totally cool with that.
All right. So is that Stafford?
It's actually Wilson. And I kind of talked myself into him as we went through. Coming into the offseason, I thought I was going to be low on him, honestly. He's had some super hot stretches. I think 2020, first half of the season, he just lit the league on fire, cratered after that, battled injuries last year. So I just kind of thought I was going to be lower on him, but I like the situation he's going into. He just put up a 22.5 point per game season last year. That's really good production from a quarterback. I'm sorry, in 2020. It dropped to 17 last year, but he was hurt. And he still has great weapons. Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick. They've got a nice running game. So I also do think his rushing upside is a little bit underrated. I mean, he ran 5 times a game in 2020. Last year with the injury, it was only 3 attempts per game. So I do think there's going to be some rushing. I think they're going to let him air it out. There have been reports lately that he's, they're tailoring the offense to Russell Wilson. Like, no duh. Of course, they're going to tailor it to him. But that means deep passes. He's a deep ball thrower. And
he's got the best moon ball in the league.
Yeah. Beautiful. And he's not great at throwing over the middle. He's going to chuck it deep.
He's too short.
Yeah.
He's too short over the middle.
Yeah. So, and I actually, for that reason, I'm a little down on Jerry Jeudy. I'm a little higher on Cortland Sutton because I think Sutton's going to get those deep targets, but that's another show. But yeah, so I think he's got some big upside, and that whole division is just going to be a shootout. So
yeah, we've already got 3 quarterbacks in that division, and the 4th isn't going to be that far down the list. So let's pull these guys up. Aging guys. I mean, Stafford's not that old, but let's pull these 3 up and talk about this, because I don't see how we can't talk about these 3 to round out QB1 just because of the passing volume and how good they are. So unless you're surprising me, I think we're going to have to talk about Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers, and we'll put these guys in their appropriate space. So who do you have next?
I've got Tom Brady next, and it's just crazy at that age putting him that high, but it's just at the point where I don't know why you'd bet against him anymore. So his weapons have definitely taken a hit, and that's part of the reason maybe he's not up above Dak. Chris Godwin may not be back right away. That's going to be a hit to the offense. Gronk is retired for now. We'll see. But he's just, 21 points per game in 2020, 22 last year. This is an offense that throws deep. He throws a ton of touchdowns. I just don't see any reason why it falls off a cliff for Brady this year. So good offensive line. Just everything about the situation is positive. So yes, he's lost some weapons, but he's going to be just fine. I bet he's one of those that slips in some drafts just because, people have drafted him so many times, and you could get a nice value on Tom Brady in a draft.
Yeah, I see that. We've got we got the former NFC North and now Super Bowl champion Matthew Stafford. I'm going to put him here. And I don't know if you have him here
Yep.
but I have to put Rodgers last in this tier. I know we have to put him in the tier,
Yeah.
but I'm going to put him last. I will never draft him. I don't draft Packers. I only draft from a pool of 31 teams.
Fair.
Um, but everybody's dogging the Bears wide receivers, and they should. There's not like a lot of pedigree in that group. The Packers wide receivers, trading Devontae Adams, he doesn't have that many guys to throw to,
Yeah.
and he is getting older. And so I know you have to because he's won the MVP twice in the last 2 years. But I'm pretty stern on my belief that Stafford's a better choice and that McVay offense than Rodgers is in the Packers offense this year.
No, that's how I have them ranked. Before we get into them, I did realize we forgot the headphones on Russell Wilson. They have a new play caller there in Denver. I got to keep you honest on these.
It'd be his new play caller as well, since he's now, he hasn't been there before.
Yeah. But it's also Nathaniel Hackett, who that Green Bay reminded me of that. So, but yeah, let's get into Stafford first. It was only his second 300-plus point fantasy season in his career, 13th year in the NFL. So on that end, it's kind of like, man, is he going to regress some this year, Stafford? You can also look at it. He's 1-for-1 putting those up in LA, so as soon as we got him out of Detroit, he nailed it. He gave us a great year. So I don't know that there's another gear from what he did last year. I think it's right around this 20 points a game range. That's why he's not in that S tier. I don't know if we're seeing 25 points a game out of him. That's kind of the rushing quarterbacks, but I think he's a lock for about 20 points a game. He's a 0 on the ground. He'll throw some interceptions, led the league last year. He's 34, though. That's not that old in quarterback terms. So, yeah, I don't see any reason to be down on him. And I like the Allen Robinson addition. So I don't know. I think they can replace Odell Beckham just fine. And Cooper Kupp's going to keep being Cooper Kupp. And they've got one of the better play callers in the league. So totally fine drafting.
I'd still bet on the Rams offense, but I will say that if you were in a league where you have a high penalty for interceptions and you have a low, if you have a high penalty for interceptions, that does actually work for Aaron Rodgers because he will dirt the ball. He will actually just throw the ball out of bounds or whatever because he's not going to put it at risk. In a way, I think it's actually a little bit of a detriment to Rodgers in that he doesn't actually put the ball at risk. Whereas Stafford, if Stafford ever paired with Bruce Arians, you would see some like crazy fireworks, right? Like because he is the definition of a no risk it, no biscuit. Like he's like, yeah, let's do it, let's fit it in there. So that works in fantasy if you don't have to pay a huge tax on turnovers, whereas if you do, I don't know a lot of leagues like that, but some leagues get into exotic scoring. I could make that argument, but I think in most standard leagues that this works out well. So, all right. So that's your top 12. Those are your QB ones. I know we spent a lot of time on that, but I think it was important to kind of go through because those are the guys that you're almost certainly going to have on your fantasy squad. So these are the guys that you're choosing from. You know your league better than us, but if you're playing in a league where you only start one quarterback, you've got 10 teams, you've got 12 teams, these are the guys that are almost certainly going to be starting. Maybe you're carrying some of these other guys for upside, but for the most part, these are the guys that you're going to be focused on. The next group of guys, again, these are the boom bust guys, and these are the guys with the high floor, but maybe not necessarily the high ceiling. There's no real chance that they're going to bust into that QB1 type range. So let's go through some of those guys. Let's populate the boom first. Like, how do you want to do this? Who are these guys, and who should I start pulling up here?
I think we have to talk about Trey Lance. He is going to be the Jalen Hurts of last year, the Lamar Jackson of years before. He is going to, some people are going to view him as high as, I don't know, after Russell Wilson, maybe. He could be a top 10 drafted quarterback this year. I have no doubt about that. And it's crazy because we've seen almost nothing from Trey Lance. But I'm basing this off of that. We're not going to have Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco. I just assume he's going to get traded. But if that does happen, we only saw a little bit of meaningful playing time for Trey Lance last year. He rushed 7 times for 40 yards on 50% of the snaps in one game. And then his 2 full games where he had full snaps, he rushed 16 times for 89 yards and then 8 times for 31 yards. He scored 20, 15, and 19 fantasy points despite only completing 58% of his passes. So, we've already seen, it's kind of like Hurts. It's kind of like Lamar. we see these rushing quarterbacks, they're doubted, but when they get the full workload, the 16, 17 starts, they generally produce fantasy points just because how much they're rushing. So I could make a case for waiting past these top 12 and just taking Trey Lance. You got to know your league because he's going to get hyped up in some leagues. But again, how you mentioned earlier, know your league. Some leagues they'll draft 12 and then everyone's going to wait to the last round to take a second quarterback. Some leagues people are going to be drafting 2 and 3 quarterbacks earlier on. So know your league here. But I think Lance is a great one, and you could easily pick up a floor quarterback later on and pair him with him if you want a little bit of safety, or you just play the waiver wire later. But I mean, we saw, Kyle Shanahan with RG3 in the past just light it up. I know it didn't last real long for RG3. I think that was the face I saw you make, but he hasn't had a quarterback like this in a long time. Shanahan hasn't. So just a little bit of stuff in college to base it on, but he ran for 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns in the season. So I don't know. Lance is boom bust, but if he's in Jalen Hurts' spot next year, I don't think anyone would be surprised.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring him up there because he's so raw, and he saw the least amount of time of the rookie quarterbacks from last year. Why don't we deal with all the rookie quarterbacks? I mean, we can kind of move guys where you need to if we fill in with more of the vets, but let's deal with the rest of that rookie class from last year. So in terms of drafting this year, so I pulled up Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, who has had a very quiet last couple of weeks. Haven't heard anything about him lately. And then Mac Jones. And so I think that at least 2 of these guys are probably going to go in this tier as well. But I'm not sure where you have them. So let's start placing these guys in.
Yeah. So I actually just researched the rookie quarterbacks from last year pretty recently. I left out Trey Lance just because he barely played, but it was pretty bad for this group. Like the passing touchdown percentage from these quarterbacks. I mean, Trevor Lawrence threw a touchdown on only 2% of his passes, which is like historically bad. Same for Wilson. Fields had a bad touchdown rate. He was also in and out of the lineup a decent amount. I feel like his statistics are a little harder to just take. Actually, the 2 best just statistically were Mac Jones and Davis Mills. But so let's start with, I think we have to start with Fields here. He's got the most upside of this group, and we'll get to Lawrence later. He's a complicated one, but I do think that Fields has the most upside. And from a fantasy perspective, he at least had a little bit better yards per attempt. He was 22nd in the league last year when Trevor and Wilson were 31 and 32. Completion percentage was bad, but he's at least throws the ball downfield and he runs a lot. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's the rushing that we want. He averaged 6 carries for 35 yards. His last 7 starts, he was 7.4 rushing attempts per game. He also gets the cool looking headphones because he has a new play caller this year, which you could probably tell me a lot more about him, Luke Getsy. But
we don't know a ton about Luke Getsy, but we know he's not Matt Nagy.
Exactly. Yeah. So that is certainly a boost there, as he's not Matt Nagy. But it's really going to come down to how are they going to use him. If you told me that we were going to get Justin Fields, drop him back 30 plus times a game, they're letting him run all over the field, put his body at risk, take shots. If he's playing like that, man, like I'm drafting him just as much as Lance. He's got huge upside. I worry a little bit. It's going to be like a rushing offense. Take care of him with the lack of weapons, ease him in, try to get him on track. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because if they turn him loose, it could be a good year for him, even though his weapons are lackluster.
I mean, if we had an icon for the opposite of weapons, like we'd probably need to put it here. We probably need to put it with Rodgers, right? I mean, it's, I like Darnell Mooney a lot, but you need 3 wide receivers to soak up targets in the modern NFL. I do think that they're going to have a more conservative approach this year in terms of what they expect him to do. I think they're going to be able to do enough to evaluate him to see if he's the guy. I don't think that precludes them from being able to do that, but I don't think that they're going to just turn him loose. I think this is going to be that core building year where they're looking to establish the things that he does well. I sure hope that they use a lot of play action with him and use that what we believe will be an elite trait for Justin Fields, which is his downfield accuracy. Yep. I don't know if there's going to be that many people are on the other end of that. I just do not know how this is going to shake out. They have brought a lot of guys in. you would think just the law of numbers that, maybe one of these guys sees that opportunity and comes in and can soak up the targets and really do something with them.
Yeah.
But, there is a low level of excitement about the wide receiver room because of the lack of pedigree. That does not mean that those guys cannot step up. They're all professional players, and sometimes you just need the opportunity. So growth can happen, like all those things. But at this point, as we sit here in the middle of July, you cannot be that excited about his weapons. They are building a war chest to go get a free agent if possible, and they certainly are likely to be in a position to use a high draft pick next year on one of those guys that can come in and help him instantly, right? If you're following the Joe Burrow, surround him with weapons plan, that Jamar Chase guy might be available next year, right? So that's the kind of thing that you have to think about for Bears is that Fields may not have that cut him loose, but that doesn't mean that he still can't do enough in a modern offense to where he's a useful fantasy player this year.
Yep. And like I said, while Lance, I think, could fit into that A tier depending on your risk tolerance, I think Wilson leads off the tier below them. I have him ranked 14th after the S and the A tier, but I would rather take him over some safe players. So I don't know if I'd call Wilson safe. But
okay, so where do you have him? You have him on this?
I'm not very high on him, honestly. I've got more boom bust players. Maybe you can make an argument that he's a boom player. I don't know.
You want to put him here?
I've got him in D personally.
All right, let's put him in D for now, and we'll kind of slide him around when we get to that. How about Trevor Lawrence? You said he's a complicated one.
I've got him at B, and I kind of don't want him. So I was high on him last year. I really just bet on the pedigree here. Obviously, Urban Meyer ruined him. It's hard to account for that, but you just look at his stats. Like last year, like I said, he had a 2% touchdown rate, which I know isn't everything, but you look at QBs with touchdown rates under 3% over the past 3 years, it's a bad list. It's like Daniel Jones, Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones again, Josh Rosen, Deshaun Kaiser. Like it's a really bad list of players that have had as bad of a season. He was last in yards per attempt, 32nd in yards per attempt out of 33 quarterbacks. The completion percentage was bad. So it was a historically bad season for Trevor Lawrence last year. We're just hoping that Urban Meyer's gone and what he looked like at Clemson comes through.
Yeah, addition by subtraction for Trevor.
Yeah. So I think the disappointing thing for him was that he didn't run the ball that much. So I don't know. He did have about 4 rushing attempts per game, but it didn't amount to anything. I thought there'd be a little more athleticism there, but maybe with some new weapons, new coaching staff, he can have that boom. I was tempted to put him down in D, honestly, but I'm going to maybe give it one more year here.
Well, we'll stick him here for now. And again, we might add in more guys that are more veterans here.
New play caller as well for Trevor Lawrence. So.
Oh, that's right. All right. And then Mac, I'm just going to put Mac here because I don't think that he's a boom guy, but he has proven that he can be a high floor guy. So I'm going to put him at the top of C. He might shift down as we get into the veterans, but I think he's in C. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. He's not at the top for me, but yeah, he's going to play every game as long as he's healthy. He's going to run the offense. I just don't love in New England. They play defense. They run the ball. That's the main concern for me. I don't love the weapons either. So he's not going to have the volume. He's not going to run the ball, but he'll be there for you every week.
I'm throwing the target on Lawrence just because he has such a good processor. I know that's maybe, the accuracy piece maybe wasn't there for him, but his processor's so good. That's kind of what I was going for there. And the processor on Mac is elite. So I'm going to put that there. And that's why Rodgers and Brady and Burrow all have that as well. It's just there's a process. I suppose you could put it on Mahomes. He's kind of an ad libber. You can put it on a lot of these guys, but it's one of those things where they process at a higher level. So I'm trying to make sure I'm giving that credit there.
One thing on Mac Jones, also a new play caller, and this is a hysterical one. I believe it's still a battle. I haven't heard the update, but it's a battle between Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, which seems made up, but they are apparently battling it. Maybe it's actually Belichick. There's some rumors. Maybe he's just going to call plays. I don't know, but I wanted to put on the new play caller thing just because sometimes we look back at fantasy football the year after and somebody breaks out or somebody falls off a cliff and we're like, oh yeah, they had a new play caller. Obviously there was something that changed. So I just think it's worth noting on some of these guys, new play caller can change a whole lot.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So, all right, I'm looking at the guys that are remaining, and I accidentally had pulled up Kenny Pickett before. On if you're wondering what that guy was doing, I thought that was Mac Jones. I'm getting used to these pictures. So
Right.
I'm seeing Cousins. We know he's going in the C tiers. Feels
Yep.
like Matt Ryan is
Yep.
kind of an older Kirk Cousins.
Derek
Um,
Carr.
Derek Carr might be. I'm kind of curious where you have Carr. He might be a better Kirk Cousins, so he might be the top of the C. But maybe you have him somewhere else. Tannehill's kind of a
Mhm.
poor man's Kirk. Let's see who else would maybe
Well,
fit in
so
that.
I've got another for Boom, and this is a different tier of Boom. This is not the Trey Lance level, even Justin Fields. This is maybe QB2 range, and he's just as likely to bust. But Daniel Jones runs the ball a lot, and
Oh
you're going to
yeah,
see. Just wait, you're going to see the fantasy Twitter people that you follow start hyping him up as the season goes as a late round target. So I don't love it. I don't think he's real great. I think his awareness is kind of low. He tends to get hurt when he's running because he just kind of runs into hits. So this is not me saying I'm a big fan on him, but he gets
he is
Brian.
fast.
He's fast. He gets Brian Daboll, the old Bills coordinator.
Mm.
I don't think he's going to do what he did with Josh Allen, but it is a new coordinator, and he like you said, he's got rushing ability. He had over 5 rushing attempts a game last year, so he'll get you some points that way. He's put up 15, 16 point fantasy seasons. It's pretty much what Derek Carr does. So I don't know. He's kind of a boom. I have some interesting stats on Josh Allen because everyone always looks at these guys and uses Josh Allen as a comparison. Like he was so bad, and then he got a new coach and he was good. But Josh Allen, when he was terrible as a rookie, he still had 631 yards rushing on 7.1 yards per attempt with 8 touchdowns in 12 games. So while Allen was terrible, he was like Lamar Jackson on the
He was
ground.
usable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was, when you saw him on the field, you're like, hey, he's got something. He just can't throw the ball yet. But I'm not sure. We're not there with Daniel Jones, but a little bit of upside there, especially in a 2 QB league.
All right, so let's pull up some of these veterans.
Yeah.
Who else is in C? Did I get the 4 guys that you have in C, or are they lower?
Cousins is the leader for me in the C. He gets
Okay.
slept on a little bit, just because it's Cousins, but he's almost in his own tier, honestly. Like he puts up 20 fantasy points a game. It's not that far off. I guess last year was almost 19 the year before. He's not that far off from what Aaron Rodgers did last year or what Stafford did. Like he's almost like his own tier. I think he's above some of these boring guys. So you know what you're getting with Stafford, new play caller. Maybe that changes some things, but you know what you're getting with Stafford.
Cousin, yeah.
Sorry, yeah,
That's okay.
I was thinking of the Rams because he comes from that coaching tree.
So I would put Derek Carr ahead of Cousins, but that might be because Cousins always plays terrible against the Bears, and so I have kind of a warped perception. Like his numbers against the Bears are terrible. But is Carr next for you?
Yes, he's after Cousins.
Okay.
Yes. The knock on him is just he's barely had. I mean, he's been in the league a long time, and he's just never really put together that fantasy season. Like he hasn't thrown 30 touchdowns since his second year in the league, 2015. That was his career high, 5.5 touchdown rate. He's got a career 4.3% touchdown rate. It's lower than Andy Dalton's, Ryan Fitzpatrick's, Carson Wentz's, Tannehill, Baker, Jameis Winston. Like he just hasn't put up as many points as you may think. He's consistent. He's steady. Maybe Devontae Adams helps convert some of those into touchdowns. It's certainly
Josh
possible.
McDaniels.
Yeah, and Josh McDaniels. I don't even know what to do about that one. So that's probably a whole podcast in itself. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't think his upside's that huge unless they're just chucking it at the goal line. Adams is scoring touchdowns and he puts up a bunch of touchdowns. But he's solid.
Okay.
If you wait and you miss out on everyone, he's going to be just fine.
Okay. Who would be next?
And you could probably give him a weapon icon there, but he's got
Carr?
a nice group around.
Yeah, he's got Waller and
Renfro, and he's got some weapons. So, yeah, it gets real close after this point. I mean, you've got Tannehill. I think you can put him in the safe category. I know they drafted Willis, but I don't think Willis is going to beat him out this year. It's still a good organization. They're going to have the play action game going with Derrick Henry running the ball. Tannehill will run the ball, rush in some touchdowns. So he's certainly not exciting, but he's going to be around real late for your drafts. So, he'll put up it was 16 fantasy points a game last year, and it was kind of a disaster of a year. So he's solid. And then after that, you're getting into, I think we should probably talk about Tua. Tua is an interesting one.
Okay.
Just weapons. I mean, that's his main icon here is weapons. We've got Tyreek Hill. We've got Jalen Waddle. Mike Gesicki's a good pass catcher. They get the old 49ers offensive coordinator, so they should have a good running game. So I don't know. I think you could talk yourself into Tua making a jump, but at the end of the day, he's not going to run a ton, and I'm not sure if he has that. I'm not sure if he has the processor that Mac Jones has, and I'm not sure he's got the playmaking ability that Burrow has. And I don't know where the next level's coming from, but he's certainly got good people to throw the ball to.
Okay. Do you got anybody else on this?
Yeah, and then let's see. I feel like
Matty
I'm
Ice?
missing Matty Ice. Yeah, Matty Ice is in there. And this is one that we could go pretty deep on in this tier. So it's just kind of when you run out of room, honestly. But Matty Ice, I've been pretty down on him lately, but I think he really struggles when he gets put under pressure. And hopefully that's going to be a lot better with the Colts offensive line. He's had some good numbers on play action. I think that's going to fit in well with their offense. I trust Frank Reich. So, I would not be running out to draft Matt Ryan. I mean, it was a bad year last year, but things are certainly on the up for him as far as situation. So maybe we can get one more decent year out of him.
Why don't we cut the C tier here? And then I want to talk about preferences of drafting the B versus the C real quick. So you would draft Trey Lance before any of the guys in the C tier.
Yes.
You would draft Justin Fields before any of the guys in the C tier.
Yes, in a one quarterback league. Because, I mean, you're looking at the top two tiers, you're already at 12 quarterbacks. So, yes.
What about Lawrence ahead of the rest of these guys?
I think that's where you start getting into the difference, personally. Okay. I think if you need to start this player, I would put Cousins and Carr over him. Okay. We could probably put Mac Jones over him. I just worry he doesn't have that ceiling. But I would probably put those over him if it's someone you're going to be starting. And then I would put Lawrence generally after them. Let me get my rankings back. But yeah, I think that pretty much fits in with it. I would not trust Lawrence. I would not trust starting in week 1. So you just would want to have another plan if you did go with Lawrence.
And then Tannehill before Daniel Jones, Tua before Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
And then between Matty Ice and Daniel Jones.
I would rather take Daniel Jones than Matty Ice.
Okay. All right.
It's close between some of them, but yeah.
I'm staggering the B and the C to kind of show that differentiation there.
Perfect.
So hopefully that'll help people kind of, go. I know that you just got to know that those first two guys in the B, and then I shifted down Lawrence there. But all right, so let's talk about some other guys. We can go a little bit more rapid fire because again, we're at the point where you're in a 2 quarterback league if you're taking these guys. You're in a dynasty league if you're going to take some of these guys. So who else in the 2 quarterback league or should we consider? I'm going to start pulling some of these guys.
So these are going to be kind of guys are going to start. That's kind of where we're at right now. I want to make sure I didn't forget anyone out of the C tier, but I think we are good on that. Yeah, looks like we got everyone. So it's the guys who are going to start, Davis Mills, Zach Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jared Goff, Carson Wentz, Baker Mayfield, I guess. That's where it starts getting a little question mark. But so those first ones I mentioned, you can throw Mariota in there only because he does at least rush. And I don't know how many games we're going to get out of him, but while he plays, he may give you some rushing yards and a little bit of production. And Jimmy Garoppolo is kind of in there. We'll see where he goes and if he plays. But he's certainly a competent quarterback. If he falls in a decent situation, he could be all right. So that's kind of the group of not so much Mariota and maybe not so much Garoppolo, but you're going to get starts out of these guys. My favorites would be Mills, Wilson, Jameis, Goff.
All right. These guys' pictures. So and
you don't know what Davis Mills looks like?
Well, he looks like a giraffe.
Yeah,
he's got the longest neck ever. So there's Mills, Wilson, Jameis. Who else did you say?
Goff,
Wentz,
Baker.
Yeah. Okay. So out of that 6, I think that I would. Oh boy, God, I think Jameis.
Yeah,
is the most interesting of those guys.
He is interesting. Let me give you the knock on him would just be. We are kind of remembering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Jameis, and it's a lot different now in New Orleans. last year he
That was
played six.
pre-LASIK surgery, Erik.
That's fair. That is fair. I forgot about that. He played 6 full games last year, and he averaged only 25 passing attempts per game, 186 yards. Like, they really reeled him in. He was actually running the ball a decent amount, which I wouldn't expect coming off of ACL injury. So I just don't know if I trust Jameis Winston off of an ACL injury.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I'm at that point in my life. So that's why I'm a little lower on him than some people would be. But that's generally the order I have it in right there. Probably Wilson has more upside than Mills, but Mills
You
was
have
kind of
Baker
underrated.
sixth out of this group. Scorned Earth Baker Mayfield is all the way down here.
So it kind of depends. Are they really going to play this game where they say that he's competing with Sam Darnold?
Oh, I don't know.
Is Baker going to play 17 games? Like, he got beat up last year. He's on a 1-year deal. So what happens if they're 3-9? Like, maybe they're probably a better team than that. But I do worry a little bit just how the season goes for Baker. If they're not going to bring him back, maybe they put in Matt Corral. I don't know. I'm just a little low on him, but we'll see how camp hype goes. Maybe he runs away with the job, and then I think we could probably put him above Goff.
I mean, for me, I couldn't put Baker below the 4th of those 6 guys.
Okay,
like that. That's where because I think that I think he's the type of guy that might go a little scorched earth and just like kind of go for it. I know that he's got his downsides, and I agree with you that we should give these crutches out to him because he does miss some time.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I can kind of see some upside there. It surprises me that you'd lead off with Davis Mills, but he did play well. Like, I mean, here's all these guys that were taken in the first round, and Davis Mills comes in, and even though he looks like the second coming of Mike Lennon with that long neck, he actually played pretty well. So it's tough for me to give him too hard of a time. I still think the Texans are pretty talent deprived. I don't think that they're a very good football team. But
I agree.
But this is tough. Like, if you're in a 2-quarterback league and you missed out on everybody above here to fill in your second quarterback, like you say, these guys will get starts. They will get statistics. Whether or not they're useful statistics for you to win fantasy football games, not sure. But that's a good place. I think you kind of leave Jimmy in the free category because you don't know, at least at this point in July, you don't know where he's going to end up. And if he sticks in San Francisco the whole year, you have to assume he's not going to make that many starts. They're going to have to see what they get in Lance.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just like Lance isn't ready and Jimmy's the guy, and you get something that's just this like lottery ticket, but I just don't see it. I'm going to leave Darnold in that group.
I've seen enough of Darnold.
I've seen enough of Darnold. I mean, I've seen enough of Mitchell Trubisky. I don't think I would want that. I don't know that he's really that great. I don't think he's going to beat out Pickett. But
that's
maybe
the thing.
He will.
He's got a little rushing upside. Like, when he plays, he might put up some fantasy points, but first round quarterbacks end up playing. So Pickett will be in there.
You can't count on Mariota to make the full stretch of starts. You got Drew Lock down here. He is a starter. He's going to get if you think. I mean, I didn't add Geno Smith's picture here, but he's at least that. Now, what about these rookies? So I've got Desmond Ridder. That's that picture. And I've got Willis, and I've got Pickett. So if you're in a dynasty league, because if you're in a redraft league, you're not taking any of these guys. This is not something that you're going to take. And this was a down year in quarterbacks. Like, I was at the Senior Bowl. None of these guys particularly impressed me that much. I mean, there just wasn't like a great arm or anything like that. But these guys, I think Pickett probably will play this year. I think that the other 2 guys probably won't, but they may play in the future. Maybe they'll develop into something. Maybe you're a fan of one of those teams, and you want the upside, or maybe you just are late and you're in a dynasty league and you're like, I'll just take a flyer on these guys. So how would you rank these guys from a dynasty perspective?
Yeah, so I think Pickett's being undervalued as far as dynasty. I've done quite a few startups this year. It's not so much that I'm a huge Kenny Pickett fan, but we're pretty bad at rating these quarterbacks coming into the league as just a group. And he was a first-round pick. He goes to a super stable organization in Pittsburgh, and if they decide he's a starter, I think he's going to do relatively well. So I think he's undervalued in dynasty. And then between Willis and Ridder, like, Willis has the bigger upside. I mean, he could be your Trey Lance, Lamar Jackson sleeper type down the road. Ritter, I mean, you just mentioned you don't think Mariota is going to make all the starts. That means that Ritter could easily be starting games this year. So he's got some intriguing traits too. So even though the NFL completely wrote off these quarterbacks, I think a little bit of it was the team situations. I don't think these were elite talent rookies, but I think just kind of there weren't many chairs left. And so they fell late in the draft. But I do think there's a little bit of dynasty value for all of them.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that the stable organization piece is a really nice point about the Steelers, and they've got Mike Tomlin. He really creates that consistency, and I think that I'm interested to see. I love the local kid element, right? Like when you go to school right next door to where you play professional football. I think that's a really cool thing. And so, I'm pulling for him as much as I can pull for a Steeler, which isn't that hard. I don't really like the Steelers that much, but
me neither. It's funny as a Bengals fan, I definitely don't like the Steelers, and I find myself really liking their skill position players. So it's put me in a weird spot.
Sure. Yeah. Let's hand out some favorites. So I think the way to do this might be, maybe put your favorite player in the QB1. You can, pick from the S tier or the A tier, and then maybe pick one later guy. So maybe a top half, no doubt QB1 guy that you're just like you want on your squad, and then someone later on if you're in a 2 QB league or someone you're willing to take a chance on. Who are you really kind of circling and highlighting that you really want to draft here?
Yeah, so I mean, where does Trey Lance fit into that?
Well, I would say that for me, Lance is Lance is a boom bust guy to me, like because I don't even know that how many games he's going to start.
Yeah,
and so maybe he starts them all, but I just at this point in the calendar, there's enough competing stories to make you at least pause about Lance, and you have him up pretty high. So I think that's a valid part, but he's not in your first 2 tiers. So I think you can pick a guy up here.
Okay. Because I mean, he's going QB 14 right now. Okay. I just love him at that price. And I would be shocked if Jimmy Garoppolo is on the team. It's got to happen one way or another. Baker got traded. Let's get Garoppolo out of there.
Yeah.
So
Jimmy's
that's
next,
what I'm
right?
going. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what I'm hoping.
All right.
You got one?
Well, I feel like I'm going to get kicked off of this podcast channel if I don't put it to Justin Fields. I think that the no weapons thing is a fair criticism, but I also think that giving him – I was at camp last year, and they gave Justin Fields 0 snaps with the first team. Matt Nagy was an idiot with how he handled this. Like, I don't think I'm going out on too far of a limb here. He did not handle that situation well at all. I don't know what was going through his mind. Obviously, I don't have a personal relationship with Matt Nagy. I can imagine that he thought if I'm able to win enough games with Andy Dalton and I can sit this kid the whole year, then I'm going to get an extension and I'm going to be able to then roll him out. But I'm not going to trust my job on a rookie. I'm going to trust this smart veteran to play my system. And the problem is that his system wasn't a system. It was a collection of old plays that didn't really work, and he didn't really know how to connect running and passing. He didn't use play action. He just wasn't running a modern offense. He just was running some plays on the board. They didn't really major anything. I have a lot of thoughts on Matt Nagy. This is an addition by subtraction. I know it's the first year in a new offense for him, and I know that his first year was a bit of a bust, but he's coming in, taking all the snaps. He's the guy. To me, the Bears got incredibly lucky to be able to be in a position to trade up to take him. Yeah. This was a guy that all offseason going into that draft, it was Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields, who's going to be the number 1 pick. And then all of a sudden, this weird string of events happens that he falls in the draft a little bit. This guy has been laser focused. I don't care that he doesn't have the greatest weapons in the world. That will come. You can still be productive with a good offensive scheme and a smart quarterback. I think that he's going to set the Bears franchise record for passing yards, which is not an impressive record, but I think he'll beat that this year. And I think that he'll at least flirt with the touchdown record, because I think that he's going to show that he is a real competent guy, and this is someone that they can build around. Yeah. So to me, where he's going in drafts, I
Yeah.
would love to have Justin Fields. I probably never will because most of my friends know that I'm a Bears fan, obviously, or that they're Bears fans themselves, and so he'll go higher than a typical ADP draft.
Yeah.
But that's my guy that's below the QB1 tier. How about at the QB1 level? Who's your guy that you want to make sure you get a few draft shares of?
Yeah, and I love those two rushing upside, quarterbacks going outside of the top 12. If they don't work out, go get Tua, go get Mac Jones, go get Matt Ryan. They'll be there for you. So I love those two picks for us. I think I'm going to go with an S tier player just to have a little separation between Lance and, I think I'm going to go Lamar. Some of this is ADP based. You look at those elite quarterbacks, they're going a full round earlier than Lamar, the 3 ahead of him. There's like a nice round drop on him, and I just think he's going to run the heck out of the ball. So the Ravens talking about stable organizations, I just would be shocked if this thing goes off the rails. So I think Lamar is going to be right back competing for QB1 status this year.
I mean, all these guys in the S tier are so much fun.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this is a really cool time to be like a fan of the NFL. And I think that's at least worth mentioning. I know a lot of people that listen to the Bears podcast that I do, that they really only care about the Bears. And that's fine. Like, I get that, like, that's your entry. There's a lot of people though that, have realized just how much fun NFL football is, and just kind of being a fan of the league is a lot of fun, because there are so many really cool players that are now entering their prime. And you look at like these quarterbacks, like, Josh Allen is appointment television. Patrick Mahomes is I've seen Patrick Mahomes live a couple times because Kansas City's pretty close. He is appointment television. If the Chiefs are playing, you should be watching that game, because he's going to do something that quarterbacks just don't normally do. And as a Chargers are my second team, I'm going to play totally into that. But like, I'm going to take the other Justin. To me, Justin Herbert is doing things with the football that I think that I'm not even sure these other guys can do. And so I'm really excited to see what he can do with another year. He had even more help for him on that side of the ball. His defense is going to be better. And so to me, this team is probably going to win a lot of games. They are kind of going for it. I know it's a tough division, but that also means that all of the games that he's playing in are going to be fun. Like, imagine he gets the Chiefs twice. He gets the Broncos twice, right? Like these are going to be fun games to watch. And so I would like a fantasy share of Justin Herbert to make sure that I have just a little bit more juice in on those Charger game action. And I don't want to get beat on my fantasy week because my opponent has Herbert. So I'm going to probably break my own rule on some of these tiers in drafts. And then I'm probably going to make sure that I take him, early, to make sure that I get a piece of this guy, because I think he's too exciting.
Yeah. No, I love it. I agree totally with you. This is a fun time. I mean, when you got Derek Carr down as your 14th, 15th, whatever, best quarterback, like that, the league's in a good place. I mean, hopefully we can see some of these second-year quarterbacks make a jump, and then it's going to be nuts. We may be seeing 50 to 50 games every week. Like that, what was that Rams Chiefs game for a few years ago?
We thought that was Mexico City.
Yeah, right? we thought that was just going to be every game in 2 years. We're not quite there yet, but maybe if these second-year players can make the leap, we're going to be in for a lot of fun.
Well, I don't have any other quarterbacks to throw on the tiers. I think this is a really good start to try to think about how, you don't have to, take this as verbatim, but you can follow this process and maybe move guys around how you think. We will continue the series next week. We'll talk about tight ends next. That's kind of a more simple position to go through. We'll then hit up wide receiver or running back. I'm not sure the order. We'll do those two next. And then we'll do a flex where we'll cover a lot of the other wide receivers and running backs that we hadn't talked about. And then we'll try to bring the whole board together and show you how it works. We won't go through 100 and whatever players, but we'll kind of show you how to think about, okay, I've got S tier quarterbacks left on the board, but I also have A tier running backs. Like, do I take my S tier quarterback because it's an S tier, or do I take my A tier running back? We'll talk about that draft strategy and how your tiers of different players' positions actually kind of stack up differently as well. So we'll work through that this summer. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll have some tools, you'll have some ways to think about how to go into your draft, and all that good prep that you've put in through the summer means that you're going to dominate your draft and you're going to have a really fun fall. But Erik, really appreciate the time. Do you have anything else before we get out of here?
No, not much. Just check out the QB List Fantasy Football Podcast. We got a bunch of great stuff there. I host with Ryan Heath. He's got some good statistical looks at running backs and if they earn targets or if it kind of comes from the quarterback they play with. So we got an article up on that. We've had a podcast on it. Just, check us out, QB List.
Yeah, QB List is the best place for fantasy resource. They've got so many articles and they're all really well researched. It's a really great group. I use the I use Pitcher List for my baseball team.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I compete in fantasy baseball is because I read the Pitcher List. And I think it's the same thing for QB List. You can gain a lot of insight just by reading those articles and being part of that. And I think that the advantage of going to a place like QB List is that they're not going to give you kind of the basic cookie cutter advice that you might get on some of the like bigger sites, and which all your opponents are reading, right? So everybody else is finding this guy that's really obvious, whereas you've already had him on your squad because you read it on QB List the week before that, hey, this guy's breaking out, grab him now before the rush. And so there's a real advantage to kind of being in a group like the QB List. So I would recommend you checking out Erik's work. It's a great podcast. It's a great site. And he'll be here all summer and, beyond as well. I'll tease that. I'll tease that now. So Erik, really appreciate it. This was a great kickoff. We'll end it here. Next time, come with questions on tight ends and we'll go from there. But thanks everybody for joining us.